Hello. Welcome to Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, my YouTube channel. Used to be on the radio, and then I decided I wanted a smaller audience, and I wanted people to see my face. So I'm here on YouTube, and I am joined once again with Carissa Avallone. Carissa is a Debatrix. You also moderated the debate last night, and another debate that I did. And you are also married to Hunter Avallone. Is that correct?
Yes, that's all correct.
Okay, great. So do you want to kind of introduce tonight's topic and let the audience know specifically what you wanted to talk about and give them a little bit of background on what you've been doing since we last spoke?
Yeah, sure. So I thought it would be interesting to come on, especially since one of the debates I moderated was on left versus right anarchy. I thought it would be interesting to come on and just actually talk a little bit about socialism. I'm excited because I like more open discussions like this. I think it's a lot more productive than more of a debate format. So yeah, no, I'm really excited for it. I think I've been talking to some economists that I'm friends with and kind of getting their perspective. Mm-hmm. I am center left, so I'm not at all. I don't want to say I'm not at all. I'm skeptical of socialism, but I don't have a moral I guess hatred for it or something. I think a lot of people do. People use socialism as a slur. Sometimes you're just a socialist.
It's one of the most frustrating things as a socialist to have to deal with.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, there's so much propaganda out there, and so many America has had. I was in a debate on this guy Dylan. I forget his last name. Creationist Cat Vadim. He invited me onto a chat on this other guy Dylan's Twitch stream, and we had a number of political discussions, and I was floored. I tried to explain to everybody that there is no actual left in the United States for the most part. Mm-hmm. And that the United States is in fact a very right-wing nation. And people even saw it night before last in the debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, when Joe Biden was oh yeah, the cops, just a bunch of bad apples, just some bad apples. Right. And even in my debate last night with T-Jump wouldn't believe me that Joe Biden had said that for a while.
I know, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's hard to talk in America because everything has a different definition in America than it does everywhere else.
Yeah. I love it. I argue all the time with people who are America's becoming socialist. And I'm we're barely a social democracy. Yeah. Sit down. Come on.
Now you sent me a quote and this was about a week ago. I don't know if you have it handy, but if you do you want to read it, or should I read it?
I'm sure I can read it. 100%. Yeah. Let me just pull it up here. It's been, I think, a while.
Oh, and I tried to Google it. Who is this? Who said this?
It's actually a friend of mine. A friend of mine said it. Yeah, one of the economists that I'm friends with. He's actually I actually interviewed him cool. On my channel, but he's a right libertarian.
Yeah, a lot of economists are. That's part of. There's two issues with that with economics departments in the United States currently. One is that economics departments are a lot of rah-rah cheer on capitalism. They don't really think about it critically a lot of the time. No, not always, but sometimes. But also, socialists are actively purged from many graduate level econ programs. The guy who convinced me to be a socialist is a economist who is currently he has a PhD in economics, and he's working for a major economic firm, and he had to hide and pretend that he was a right libertarian because he literally got a question on his college exam. And I'm not going to out which college it was, but it was a major state school in the United States where it was are you now or have you ever been a member of a socialist party? And if he had said yes, he would not have been accepted into his graduate program.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Wow.
There was also, I was at, and I will name the school here because this is me outing myself. I was working in fundraising at Baruch College, one of the major economic schools like in the country. And there was a professor I knew there, and I was really into Occupy Wall Street at the time. So I was all, excited about this stuff. And there was this point that Marx had made in one of his things where he talked about how the price of one commodity goes up can affect the price of other commodities. So like the price of silver goes up, the price of silk falls, that kind of thing. And so I asked this economics professor, it's like, hey, is there any empirical evidence to show that Marx was right or wrong? And the economics professor just kind of looked at me and told me to read Milton Friedman. Like, didn't even answer the question. So, and I'm not saying they're all like that. I'm just saying the economics departments and as a result of just that, and also like they tend to lean right and they tend to lean libertarian.
No, I understand that. I was actually curious because there's so many like definitions of socialism. What and not even just definitions, but there's also so many like ways to actually like establish socialism, even if you have like a uniform like ideology. So how would your ideal socialist society work?
Well, first, I would love to talk about that. That's exciting. But first, let's actually get the quote out for everybody so people can hear what you sent me and stuff.
Yeah, of course. So the quote is, their pitfall is that they think they are slick to brainwash the layman into making him think the worst democratic.
The word democratic, I think that's the worst is a typo.
I'm sorry, I did it. He sent this to me in a DM, so I read it, and I haven't read it for a while. So you're right. The word democratic would prevent any form of tyrannical socialism. Socialism by nature is tyrannical because it abolishes private property. Democratic socialism is simply to give the opportunity to the layman to vote for the person who is going to take his property away.
Oh my God. Speaking as a playwright, I thought I was the drama queen. But no, this is a common misconception about socialism and about like how socialists view property and stuff. And we talked a little bit about that, but there's a few things, and this goes into my particular form of socialism, which I'm the closest at the moment to anarcho-communism, mostly because I don't like balancing my checkbook. I'm making fun of it a little bit there, but I have serious issues even with the use of money. I really if you could give me a magic wand, I would destroy all money in the world. And just be like, no, we're going to get on without it. But anyway, so what we have here is this is a quote from Mikhail Bakunin, who's one of the primary anarchist thinkers, and he's someone that Bakunin said some great stuff. He also said some cringy stuff, but this is one of his better lines. We are convinced that liberty without socialism is privilege and injustice, and that socialism without liberty is slavery and brutality. And this is really key. Now, this doesn't pull directly to democratic socialism. This is libertarian socialism. But we have similar definitions of property. And I'm also going to give you really quickly a name that you're probably going to recognize, George Orwell. So George Orwell
was a socialist.
Yes, was a socialist, even though the anti-socialists try to claim him because he was an anti-Stalinist. So this is what he wrote. This is an amalgamation of two quotes of his, but this is from the first is from an essay titled Why I Joined a Socialist Party. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly here. So to begin with, the era of free speech is closing down. For some years past, I have managed to make the capitalist class pay me several pounds a week for writing books against capitalism. But I do not delude myself that this state of affairs is going to last forever. We have seen what happened in Italy and Germany, and it will happen here sooner or later. The time is coming when every writer will have the choice of being silenced or of producing the dope that a privileged minority demands. I have struggled against that just as I have struggled against castor oil, truncheons, and concentration camps. And the only reason which in the long run, and the only regime which in the long run will dare to permit freedom of speech is a socialist regime. That in and of itself would be a sufficient reason for joining a socialist party. For perhaps 10 years past, I have had some grasp of the real nature of capitalist society. I have seen British imperialism at work in Burma, and I've seen something of the effects of poverty and unemployment in Britain. One has got to actively be a socialist, not merely sympathetic to socialism, or one plays into the hands of our always active enemies. And this is the most important part. Every line of serious work that I have written since 1936 has been written directly or indirectly against totalitarianism and for democratic socialism. So, you know, I really like Orwell. He is kind of grounded in his time and place, because we have seen he was thinking that there would be massive crackdowns on freedom of speech, which there kind of were in England, but not as much in the United States, like within 10 or 20 years. And we haven't quite seen that. But I know that myself as an artist, I have felt my freedom, both the freedom to write what I want to write, and also the freedom to live how I want to live and to make my living as a writer, really challenged by capitalism and by the constraints of this system. It's not there's not as much liberty as people like to think. There's the illusion of it, but it's kind of like if you play an MMO or like if you play like, what's a good, Fallout 4.
I mean, I don't know any details about it, but I know the name.
The beginning of Fallout 4, like they act like you have a choice, and you can choose to say no to the guy that initiates the whole game, but the game still forces you to eventually say yes, and that's kind of, capitalists tend to control people by controlling the environment, which then incentivizes certain choices that we otherwise would not make were we free. And it's one of the reasons why I think socialism ultimately will promote the most free society that we can possibly have. But to get back to your friend's quote, what he's worried about here is that socialism is tyrannical because it abolishes private property. What he needs to understand is that socialists and capitalists define private property differently. To a capitalist, they usually use two forms of property. There is public property and private property, government-owned and state-owned. To a socialist, there are several more forms of property. You have public, government-owned. You have private, which is owned by an individual or small group. And then you have personal. You also have common. And that's actually where the common communism comes from. Like a lot of people think it comes from communes. Like we all want to live in like a weird commune. You'll even hear like, they'll be like, you can just go live in a commune right now, dude, bro. It's fine. But
I know, just leave America, right?
Yeah. No one would. Yeah, no, it's common property the idea is that types of property can change. Common property is essentially knowledge is a good example of common. Free, freeware software, like on open source software on the internet, that's common property. The air, water, the ocean. Water is now becoming privatized, unfortunately, and you give them long enough, the capitalists will also privatize the air. So like the types of property can change. Like for instance, Donald Trump tried to patent the word "you're fired," and he,
that's weird.
Yeah, exactly. He tried to be like, "Oh, that's mine. I invented it. I popularized it." Anybody that says "you're fired" owes me a quarter or whatever, So it's really like our relationship to property is a legal one, and it's what the society incentivizes. So. What's important to understand is the distinction between private property as socialists see it, and we see it as oppressive, and personal property as socialists see it, and we see it as good and right and just. And this, whenever you try to explain this to a capitalist, they freak out, and like they just accuse you of lying. Like they will not engage with this.
No, I understand that.
Yeah. So this is a quick and easy way that I have found to understand the difference. Imagine if I waved a magic wand and all the police and all the soldiers and all the government officials all disappeared. Like I'm Thanos and I do the snap and they're all gone. Yeah. Okay. So we have to deal with that world without a state. Now, the distinction between personal property and private property is what can you actually hold and control and possess without the aid of that institution. So for instance, I do the Thanos snap, there's no police, you live in your home. And you can reasonably defend your home with a shotgun or whatever, or your friends and family, you or just simply with your presence. By living in your home, you disincentivize someone from coming in and moving into your home and taking it. But what about the person who owns 100 homes that are occupied by 100 other families? And so he comes to those families and says, hey, you owe me rent. And they say, yeah, so Ted, we've been paying you rent for like 20 years, and we would have paid off a mortgage on this house time and time again, and there's really no police, so you have no ability to evict us for non-payment. So go away. What exactly is Ted, the landlord, going to do without the police or the military to keep ownership over something that he, one, does not use, and two, does not possess, and thus, without the institution of the state, cannot control? Now, that's what most socialists are talking about when we talk about the abolition of private property. And also, most socialists do not necessarily want to abolish private property. A lot of them will challenge it in one way or another, but depending upon who you talk to, some will go further than others. Does that make sense? You're muted.
All right. Am I good now?
Good.
I am very sorry.
No problem.
My question to that would be, I guess more in line of like worker co-ops and like owning a company collectively. So I feel like a lot of times, in your perspective of socialism, if someone has like intellectual property, is that private or how?
I mean, intellectual property. So intellectual property, if there is no state, intellectual property would be common. The only way one could enforce an intellectual property thing is by without like police and courts would be like by just shaming people who like use stuff without permission or whatever. It's interesting because I'm in a position where I'm a writer and I make my money from my intellectual property.
Right.
But also oftentimes intellectual property rights serve less to secure the creators, make sure that the creator enjoys the fruits of their labors, and to secure the creator's control over the creative property, and more serve to empower corporations and rob creators of their rights. A good example, that's why Bill Watterson quit doing Calvin and Hobbes in large part, because he had a very specific vision for it, but there were millions and millions of dollars to be made, merchandising Calvin and Hobbes and going in the direction of Garfield. And, that's a big part of the reason why Bill Watterson walked away and said, I'm not doing this anymore. And if he hadn't had a slightly different legal right, the companies would have just hired new people to come in and create Calvin and Hobbes, new artists, new writers, and you would see this weird zombie Calvin and Hobbes probably in the in the papers today, as opposed to the gem that we have from when he was creating it. Sorry, I'm a big fan of Bill Watterson. He's like one of my personal heroes.
That's awesome. Right. So what I would counter to that is that, from like my perception of it, is that intellectual property doesn't necessarily protect the inventor, and more protects the environment where that intellectual property is like produced. So like you have the inventor, you have the, if he's like associated with a corporation, like I know like Apple has a ton of like people who, you know, invent and work for them, and it's like a contractual like situation
where Apple owns what they create, even though they created it.
But they, you know, they kind of, they could go off on their own if they wanted to, but it's more of like,
hypothetically they could,
right?
But
Right.
who's going to pay them to do
Right.
the
It's
inventing?
it's more of like, do you want this steady job where Apple pays you a really big salary, but you're not going to get like all of the fruits of your labor, or do you want the risk of your invention flopping, and also not the publicity and marketing that is also like valued, right?
Yeah,
Because,
but you'll notice something really interesting there. So first off, there's two big distortions that are happening as a direct result of capitalism and controlling the environment. The first is that is the risk they're taking. Because we have a system where if you do not obtain currency, you are denied vital services, food, shelter, medicine. It is a huge risk to try to go off on your own and not serve a capitalist. You can get yourself and your family impoverished or even killed. So yeah, that's a risk, but that's a risk that the capitalists created in the first place with their system of laws and property. If we had a more universal means of engaging with property based upon principles like from each according to his ability, to each according to their need, there wouldn't be a risk in doing that, you know?
Right. I understand that, but I also feel like that would take away from the incentive to be able to produce in the first place. And I also feel like a social democracy could also provide the same safety nets than an actual like full-on democratic socialism, where you know, here you can actually take that risk because there's more safety nets, but it's still like a capitalistic system.
Yeah. So there's a couple problems with that, and I agree. This is a criticism that I hear quite frequently. Can you restate the first part of what you said, just because I want to make sure that I respond to everything?
Let me think. Oh man, that's a good question.
Because like the first idea pushed the second idea out of my head, or vice versa.
Yes, the second idea pushed the first. Same. So yeah. So I was talking about the social democracy provides the same safety net. I'm sorry, I don't remember my first
social democracy can provide the same safety net, but incentive, that was what it was.
Oh, right.
So here's the thing. Incentive is one of those weird things that capitalists really like to throw around, but I don't actually think this is a problem. Like we may have difficulty incentivizing like specific kinds of work, but that's not to say that they can't be incentivized other ways. Because first off, the creative people, the people that do the actual work, that actually invent the iPhones and write the symphonies, and they're not the ones and invent like the engines and make every technological breakthrough and create the medicine. They're not the ones that reap the benefits from it. The ones that reap the benefits from it are the money men who pay for it and then monetize it. Like, I mean, and we've even seen issues of this, like disastrously exploding in our faces, like insulin, big thing. The guy who created insulin specifically chose not to patent it because he wanted everyone to have access to insulin because it was easy to make. And this is an intellectual property issue. And so companies came in and grabbed it, and then they patented it. And now we've got people dying because they can't afford to buy insulin, even though insulin is actually very cheap to produce.
Right.
So, yeah. So the incentive of the doctor who's there trying to save lives is not primarily a monetary incentive. Similarly, my incentive as an artist, it's definitely not monetary. And I worked as a manager for like 10 years. And money tended to be it was a way to incentivize people, but it was like one of the worst ways to incentivize people. And we've seen this play out like in, corporate HR psychology. Oftentimes people are motivated by things other than money and motivated more strongly by it. So I kind of reject the frame that you must offer someone a huge financial reward to get the behavior that we want. And I also think that it's not just the reward that incentivizes people. I think it's fear. Like, again, before COVID, the average family in America couldn't afford a $450 expense. And definitely, like my wife, for instance, she's got a chronic illness that needs constant medicine or she could die. My incentive is not so much money as to make sure that we always have health care, and I never take that risk. Yeah. So that was the first thing. Also, when you were doing like incentives in a markets actually tend to incentivize mediocrity, because good always gets the same rewards as great, and good costs less to produce. So you really don't get like the really genius things out of a market. And then you get into issues where, technology is specifically prevented from progressing because it messes with someone's bottom line. A good example might be, the traffic in LA is terrible. And the reason why the traffic in LA is terrible is the car companies bought up all of the railroad tracks and tore them up so that they couldn't have a decent public transit system. And that happened all over the country. So people oftentimes are directly working against progress so that they personally can have wealth. So those would be my two answers to that. Does that answer your question, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing, I definitely think there are some industries. So personally, I believe the medical industry and also the judicial industry, neither of them should be privatized, because I think if you privatize them, you're running into like a lot of risks, which you honestly like stated, it shouldn't be for profit. So that's kind of like how I feel about, but I think in like the tech industries, I think the rest of the things can kind of be almost like mitigated because they're not as like, they're not dire. It's not like you have to. So one way of looking at it is that you have a supply demand situation. And if your demand is like 100%, like how it is with your wife, where she actually she needs it to survive, then they, on like the PPF curve, they can charge like a ton because it's not an optional thing. But same with like criminal justice system. But then there's many other systems where you have many more options and they may not be as good options. Like for example, tech, they have to offer competitive rates because you have Samsung who they're competing. So that kind of like drives it down, rather than in other situations where like the judicial and everything drives the cost up.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said by that, but also with regard to competition, there's a lot of big problems with it. One of the biggest ones is manufactured obsolescence. So there's a documentary you can watch called The Light Bulb Conspiracy, because it sort of centers around, there's a fire station somewhere in like Ohio, I think, that has had a single light bulb that's been burning for 100 years and hasn't gone out. Yeah. And the thing is that light bulbs, and not just light bulbs, but tons of products are purposefully built to break. and they're built to break so that you have to buy more. iPhones are a good example. They are intentionally built to break within about 2 to 4 years of use. And they specifically try to install new operating systems that will wear down the battery to incentivize the purchase of the next iPhone and the next iPhone. So you get worse technology oftentimes, and you also get issues where there's like a million different plugs because each company is trying to make sure that you buy only their plugs and like not some other third party's plug, which is just completely inefficient and makes no sense. Unless, again, your primary goal is profit as opposed to providing the service. Now, there's a quote that I actually wanted to read. I'm sorry, I'm full of quotes.
No, you're good. You're fine.
This is another one, and this applies to I was having trouble finding this earlier because I thought it was Engels, but it was actually Karl Marx. But this applies to your friend's criticism. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property, but in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, for intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us for intending to do away with your property. Precisely, that is what we intend. So, did you get what Marx is getting at there?
Yeah, it kind of sounds like he's getting back to the deal that here people don't actually own their own labor. And
they don't own their
in
labor,
a way,
they don't own their home.
This could even be more of like a establishment of private property rather than taking it away. And I understand that. I get that. But then I feel like you run into another big mess of problems where you have, I don't know, I'm sure you've heard of it before, but you have the psychological phenomenon of the disbursement of responsibility, where if you have a responsibility of like multiple people, it's less likely that the actual like right thing is going to be done because other people just tend to naturally lop off responsibility to, I guess, their peers, right?
Yeah, well, they tend to do that in a capitalist society because, again, they don't own their labor. They don't have a stake in the job that they work at. And so there's no reason to not slough off responsibility. Whereas if you are a part owner of your workplace, you are much more likely to, when someone has skin in the game, they care more than when they feel like they're just a cog in a machine and they don't have control over their workplace. I mean, like I said, I worked as a manager for 10 years, and in my industry, there was a very high turnover rate, and I had the lowest turnover rate of any manager. And it wasn't because I didn't fire people, because I did. I hated it, but I did it when I needed to. But it was because people would come and work for me and wouldn't want to leave. And I didn't pay better than anybody else. In fact, a lot of the times I paid worse, just because like my company was super cheap. But what they really liked was the fact that I as a manager didn't sit them down and tell them everything they needed to do. Instead, I saw my role as getting them there and setting up the situation to bring out the best in them and to let them bring their own unique approach to the projects that we were having. And by giving them a degree of control over what they did, they actually, like, one, became incredibly loyal to me, and two, our team really flourished and we did some amazing stuff. I mean, by the time I left, we were responsible for about $1.7 million a year. Yeah, and our clients were really super happy with us. I'm still glad that I left because I avoided COVID just barely, but I still really miss that because it was like the best job that I ever had. And all of that came down from me applying anarchist leadership principles to what was a capitalist workspace.
Right. So I'm not saying necessarily that people shouldn't have any responsibility, because even in a capitalistic system, people are responsible for their actions and how they perform the job.
Mm-hmm.
So you have like, but I guess my perspective is that in a socialist, I guess, society, you'd have multiple people voting to make like decisions that here people are like, I mean, they're kind of like experts they like studied these things.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess who's to say that like the majority would rule better on like business decisions than people who have like years of expertise? Isn't that like a division
Mm-hmm.
of labor type of scenario?
I mean, it is, but the problem is that you've got, so expertise is important,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also ways that we can design our systems which actually outperform more traditional ways of doing expertise. Because first off, like, success within a capitalist marketplace is not necessarily correlated with expertise. You know, just because you're good at making money doesn't mean you're actually an expert in anything other than perhaps making money.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you know, even people who are experts at making money may never make a lot of money because they never find themselves in a position to, due to outside circumstances.
I'm not necessarily saying that their expertise would just be making money, but like how I've also worked as a manager too, and how I've seen my bosses kind of go in and out, be fired and be hired. And I feel like a big aspect of that is, you know, where have they worked before? What success have they had before in their leadership skills? And like, especially from like almost like a perspective like of investing, how are they like operating the finances of the firm? Are they reinvesting it into like technology? And I feel like, and I really think it does come back to Adam Smith's perspective of division of labor, because the more honed in you are on your expertise, the more you're going to develop that expertise, and the more like spread out you are. Like, I'm sure that people could actually become invested in, you know, where the money is going in their firm, but that would decrease the quality of their other work, because they would be not focusing on their other work and more focusing on I guess like the finances of their company. So wouldn't it make sense for like, and I mean, I would even see it as a possibility for them to elect a CEO who would take care of those things.
Well, you know, you could elect, I mean, all of that could be taken care of by, for instance, workers' co-ops. And there's plenty of empirical research that shows that worker co-ops are actually better both at delivering the service that they deliver better service, they interact better with the customers, and they take better care of the employees. The one place that they do not outperform traditional hierarchical capitalist firms is in making money for investors, because the purpose of any capitalist firm is not to do the actual service of what it's really to create the largest return for the minimum investment for their investors. I mean, Milton Friedman, David Friedman's father, famously put that forward, and that's been like the driving impetus behind like every American business venture since, or every normative American business venture since. So and again, this is one of the things that people tend to miss out with regard to capitalism, is that it really is a dictatorship of the capitalist class, as in what happens in industry for the most part, and like what projects get greenlit and what don't, and how things are managed and who becomes CEO and who doesn't. It's ultimately up to a very small class of investors and owners. And these people are not necessarily wise people. They're not necessarily experts. They're just people who happen to have a lot of money.
But couldn't you say the same thing for the workers? How they don't necessarily know what's best for the company. They're experts in their field, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can like know the way that the company should actually go. And shouldn't like CEOs be hired on their track record for those things?
I mean, they could be. I could see, you can have hierarchy within a collectivized workspace. If workers decide that things will go better if they listen to this guy. Yeah, absolutely. I just think it would be better if those people were elected by everyone that works there, as opposed to if they were appointed by some investors or some owners that don't really know anything about the business and don't actually do that much.
Couldn't that actually segue back into capitalism though?
Well, no, because capitalism is a very specific thing. Like, it's not, capitalism is characterized by private ownership of the means of production. So private ownership of vital industry and resources. So not owned by the community, not owned by the government, owned by individuals. It's also characterized by wage labor, and it's characterized by investment within a capitalist marketplace for profit. And it's really the investment aspect that is the most telling of capitalism. Like, that's why capitalism is able to produce and as much as it does, and that's why it industrialized the world as quickly as it did, because it incentivized people with money to put money towards other ventures, which incentivized people to do more ventures, which spread out, and now we've got everything that we've got. And that was an excellent way to kind of kickstart industry, even though it had some horrible and inhuman side effects. I mean, child labor, people losing arms and legs and machines, horrible repression of the working class.
And then unions came along.
Then unions came along. Then capitalists paid Pinkertons to kill union members. Then fascists came along, and you notice that he and use performative cruelty to try to keep the hierarchy in place because they're insane. That was the castor oil comment, by the way, from George Orwell. That was a move that Italian and Spanish fascists used to do, where castor oil is a powerful diuretic, and they would feed it to their victims, strip them naked, and march them through the streets while it did its work, just to shame, humiliate, and dehumanize them. Because there is a certain subsect of the population that's so devoted to hierarchy and mastery that the mere idea of equality drives them insane.
And I guess that's my concern when it comes to anarcho-capitalism, that that would rise up more. And I guess I'm a little bit more toward social democracy, just because I feel like that's the best mean between everything. Because you kind of circumvent the issue where people are kind of mandated to stay in their jobs because they're not making, enough to actually, be out of work for a couple of weeks, right?
Sure.
You don't have that issue.
There's a distinct problem with that, though, because I would agree with you on that. Here's the problem, though. I think that a sort of Bernie-style New Deal kind of economy would be great, especially if you did it like the Green New Deal. We clearly saw amazing results from what FDR did with regards to that. And that, I think, is kind of my vision of social democracy as it has been implemented in the past, was really like the FDR administration. But you saw what happened to it afterwards, and you also saw how crazy people got about the New Deal and how hard they resisted. I don't know if you know about this, but several of the richest families in the country actually got together and tried to overthrow FDR over it.
Oh wow.
If you can look it up, it's called The Businessman's Plot, and it was a number of very wealthy families connected to, among other people, the Bushes, President Bush's family. And what they did was they tried to get a retired general by the name of Smedley Butler, who was very popular with a number of soldiers, to lead a bonus army. These were soldiers who had not been paid and were kind of doing an Occupy Wall Street camp out onto Washington, storm the White House, and declare himself the dictator of the new fascist America. And and
What's his name? Trump?
And Smedley Butler was like, okay, that sounds great. And then immediately went to Congress and was like, hey, these guys want me to overthrow the country. And Congress looked into it, determined that yes, it had happened and that it was a credible threat, and then let everyone off the hook. No one went to jail. No one got in trouble because they're rich. And in America, rich people are above the law.
It's honestly true.
Yeah. So the thing is that what I'm getting at, and why I think we need to move beyond capitalism, is that ultimately success within the capitalist marketplace breeds more success. Markets are inherently biased towards previous actors within the market. So the way you see this is with like Vegas odds. If you go into a horse race and you drop a bunch of money on a horse, suddenly the odds are going to change. And then everybody sees that the odds change. They go, oh, that guy knows something I don't. They go over, they drop money on the horse. And suddenly everyone's betting on a crappy horse that you just happen to put a bunch of money on for one reason or another. Right. So yeah, as capital centralizes power in a few hands, those people then have a direct incentive to use that power to take control of the state and to make policy what's most convenient for them, not convenient for us. And we see this in the United States is now more of an oligarchy than an actual democracy. And popular policies like Medicare for all, not getting into a war every few years are, sidelined for what is most convenient for the richest and most powerful people in the country. And I think that is an inevitable factor of allowing that kind of consolidation of wealth and privilege that capitalism creates as a byproduct. And even if you get like a good principled capitalist who doesn't go and buy himself a mayor or a senator, well, he's just going to get out competed by another less scrupulous capitalist who will do those things and will buy himself the senator and will make remake the laws to make sure his business succeeds where all others fail. Humans are able to alter the rules of the system in which they are. And when we give only a few people the ability to do that, as opposed to spreading that out among everybody, we run into very, very serious problems of corruption. It's why I say, like, libertarians will say, oh, it's not capitalism, it's crony capitalism. And I'll say, all capitalism is crony capitalism on a long enough timeline.
No, I understand that. I guess my question would be, I feel like you could have the same perspective with socialism where it's never worked very well, right?
I mean, I disagree, but it hasn't worked very well. Yeah, socialism hasn't worked very well in the USSR. And even then, I think the USSR was, as monstrous as they were at times, the Bolsheviks were still a step up from the Romanovs. We've seen socialism function in a number of places. The first thing that I would recommend that you watch is there's a great documentary. You and Hunter can sit down and watch. It's very entertaining. It is called The Take by Naomi Klein. And it's about the recovered factories movement in Argentina. It's one of the things that convinced me of my current political leanings, to tell you the truth. Argentina was ravaged by an era of hyper capitalism in the 90s, where they, for instance, were selling it would be this street brought to you by MasterCard, that level of stuff. And they enacted everything in the IMF's playbook on how to make your country prosperous, and it destroyed the country. And these workers were sitting there staring at these empty factories they'd been kicked out of because they weren't profitable enough, and watching the owners try to sell them off for scraps. And they broke in, ran the thing themselves with no bosses, and it worked amazingly well. So the recovered factories movement in Argentina is a good example. Another really good example is the Mondragon Corporation in Spain. You've also got several other, you could argue that the Scandinavian countries are more socialistic, and they are some of the happiest countries in the world.
But they're social democracies, though, right?
Yeah,
I know Sweden used to be more of like a democratic socialist country, and then it actually started moving to social democracy, and they've like seen a lot of improvement in their country.
I mean, there can be improvement, but there's a kind of a poison pill that you wind up swallowing when you move more in a capitalist direction, and the poison pill becomes social stratification. In fact, I meant to bring this up in the debate last night because you notice I was wearing an Iceland shirt. And the reason I wore that was the Icelandic police shot the first person ever in the entire history of their country, shot and killed the first person ever, like just a few years ago. And the thing is that Iceland is a great example of what happens when you bring in these neoliberal reforms, because the country has always had a very strong socialistic bent. Like you can find welfare laws for the Icelanders going back to 1290 that are more aggressive than American welfare laws, but when they joined the EU, they altered their economic system, and as a direct result, suddenly they started having more homeless people. And it became like a really big problem, and crime went up, and suddenly their crime was around the levels of the rest of Europe, whereas before there had almost been no crime. So I think there's a bit of a give and take, and the more society stratifies, like the more inequality there is, the more likely you run into a disaster where, for instance, an insane, vapid game show host somehow manages to become president just because he's rich and on TV, Right.
But I think that also might be a symptom of for-profit justice systems too, because that's where I feel like a lot of like oligarchy happens, where, you're right. Like for some things, the rich are held accountable to an extent, but then they get away with like so much, like even just like the tax fraud with Trump. It's just like, it's insane. So I think effectively they're above the law. But if we had more of a nonprofit justice system, I don't think we'd necessarily have that as much of that issue, and that would at least be mitigated to an extent.
I would agree. It's just the logic of neoliberalism is, and this is also part of one of the big problems with capitalism, is that capitalism is an inherently unstable system because it relies on investment. So to keep the wheels of capitalism greased, you have to have a constant stream of people throwing money at the stock market. And the only way they're going to keep doing that is if they're making money and they're getting a return on investment. This is why they talk about capitalism has to have perpetual growth no matter what. Because if the economy doesn't grow, then you get a crash, and then that creates a vicious cycle where people stop investing and these businesses stop being able to open up and innovate. And there's a number of problems with perpetual growth models, in that they lead to one, that they lead to environmental devastation, but also two, they have to constantly be opening up new markets and find new ways to get money out of people. And one of those ways is private prisons. And if you don't open those new markets with a capitalist marketplace, what happens then is things slow down and you get a crash and everybody freaks out until they find some other new thing to pull from. So the actual system itself crashes every 10 to 20 years, like without fail. Now, it always does come back stronger than before, which was another thing I was mad about Trump with, where he was like, oh, we built the best economy in American history. Dude, yes, everybody built the best economy in American history. That is a characteristic of the stock market. If you are not in a recession or a depression, it's always the best economy that there's ever been.
Yeah, it's like, oh, unemployment is record low. It's like, no shit, it's been going down for like the past 10 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, yeah, that guy. I'm not a fan of the president. Just have that on record. I know that's a hot take. So there is something that I wanted to bring up here also. Because you mentioned anarcho-capitalists, and this was another one of the many quotes that I have. I'm sorry that I'm throwing all these quotes at you.
Don't worry.
So this comes from David Graeber. So how can you be for a free society and be against wage labor? If I want to hire someone to pick my tomatoes, how are you going to stop me except through force? Now, logically, then, any attempt to abolish the wage system can only be enforced, in their view, by some new version of the KGB. One hears such arguments frequently. What one never hears, significantly, is anyone saying, if I want to hire myself out to pick someone else's tomatoes, how are you going to stop me? Everyone seems to imagine that in a future stateless society, they will somehow end up members of the employing class. Nobody seems to think that they'll be the tomato pickers. But where exactly do they imagine that these tomato pickers are going to come from? Here one might employ a little thought experiment. Let's call it the parable of the divided island. Two groups of idealists each claim one half of an island, and they agree to draw a border in such a way that there are roughly equal resources on each side. One group creates an economic system where certain members have property and others have none. And those who have none have no social guarantees. They will be left to starve to death unless they seek employment on any terms the wealthy are willing to offer. The other group creates a system where everyone is guaranteed at least the basic means of existence and welcomes all comers. What possible reason would those slated to be the night watchmen, the nurses, and the bauxite miners on the capitalist side of the island have to stay there? The capitalists would be bereft of their own labor force in a matter of weeks. As a result, they'd be forced to patrol their own grounds, empty their own bedpans, and operate their own heavy machinery. That is, unless they quickly began offering their workers such an extravagantly good deal that they might as well have been living in a socialist utopia after all. For this and any number of reasons, I'm sure that in practice, any attempt to create a market economy without armies, police, and prisons to back it up will end up looking nothing like capitalism very quickly. Yeah. Now, do you understand what he's getting at there?
Yeah. No, I understand that. I do feel like I don't know. I feel like it's slightly reductionist, but I think that might be the point.
Yeah. I would agree that it is reductionist. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Keep going.
No, go ahead.
So, you asked me earlier, do you want to stay on like the previous subject here, or did you want me to kind of go on to like my ideas on society?
Yeah, go ahead. Go for your ideas.
Okay, great. I will open up with a quote. Sorry, it's really funny. Did you ever watch the web series The Guild?
I don't know. I haven't. No.
Okay, so Joss Whedon on there plays an anarchist, and he's not really an anarchist. He's he's basically like a little kind of ANCAP Ayn Rand douche. But the funny thing is, and it was the one joke, the one anarchist joke that like rang true to me, was he always had a quote for everything. So
that's cool. Yeah.
So I'm kind of making fun of myself there, but let's and this is the last one, I swear.
You're fine. So
this comes from Voltairine de Cleyre. And Voltairine de Cleyre is an anarcho-feminist writer, and she also famously was more pro-capitalism than most. And this is her kind of talking about and critiquing the type of anarchism that I most closely identify with. So she says, an anarchist communist is a person who is a man first and a communist afterward. He generally gets into a great many irreconcilable situations at once, believes that property and competition must die, yet admits he has no authority to kill them, contends for equality and in the same breath denies its possibility, hates charity and yet wishes to make society one vast sheltering arms, and in short, very generally rides two horses going in opposite directions at the same time. He is not usually amenable to logic, but he has a heart 40 or 50 times too large for 19th century environments, and in my opinion is worth just that many cold logicians who examine society as a naturalist does a beetle and impale it on their syllogisms in the same manner as Emperor Domitian impaled flies on a bodkin for his own amusement. Besides, a free communist, when driven into a corner, always holds to freedom first. So it's not entirely complimentary, but there's a lot of truth in what she's talking about. I highly reject the notion that I am not amenable to logic. But I can see how some people would think that, because oftentimes when people think about logic, what they really think about is being cruel and like tossing your compassion aside, which is not, that's like the straw Vulcan stereotype. That's not logical. So, if you want me to describe like my ideal society, if we could, wave a magic wand now and get the conditions that we have, I would think it would be something along the lines of if you took the Federation from Star Trek and combined them with like the elves of Rivendell. The Federation, like, honestly, is, if you watch it, it's a communist society. They don't have money except when dealing with like Ferengi and stuff. And in fact, Jean-Luc Picard literally says like the acquisition of profit is no longer a driving force in our lives. And I really like, the level to which their technology has progressed. But the reason I mentioned like the kind of elves of Rivendell is I don't think it is a good idea to progress society and technology in a way that separates us from nature. Rather, I think what is key for human happiness is for us to live alongside nature. And so, essentially be one with it. One of the things that got me to really start thinking about anarchism, and communism, honestly, very seriously, was that I am an Appalachian Trail 2,000 miler, which means are you familiar with the Appalachian Trail?
I live right next to it.
Oh, that's great. I won't ask.
I'm in Maryland. I'm
so you're right by like the Harper's Ferry in that general area.
Yeah.
That's I remember that. That's where people do the 4-state challenge, where they try to do 4 states in like 24 hours.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I literally have like access to Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia, all like within like 30 minutes of me. It's crazy.
Yeah. So are you familiar with like the trail culture of thru hikers? Have you talked to any of them, or?
It's like a challenge, right? That they try to become like one with nature and stuff, right?
Well, that's part of it. Hiking, Appalachian Trail is created to foster fellowship with the wilderness. But so thru hikers, essentially what people are trying to do for any number of reasons is walk the entirety of the Appalachian Trail from Springer Mountain in Georgia all the way up to Katahdin in northern Maine. And it's a 2,200 mile unbroken footpath. So part of the trail culture is that, one, you brag about how little you have and compete with others to have less. You're carrying everything that you own on your back. And 2, you kind of live in a way that you essentially kind of depend on, like, you don't depend on it, but random acts of kindness from strangers are a huge part of the trail. It's called trail magic. And like when I was hiking it, I can't tell you how many times I rounded a corner and found like a cooler filled with like sodas and beer, just like waiting for me. People went out of their way to help each other. And, 20 miles in the woods, there's no law, there's no police, but the community, we all took care of each other. And in fact, like, that was some of the happiest that I've ever been in my entire life, was those 5.5 months that I spent, in the wilderness. Now, I'm not saying we all live as, through hiking bums. There's also a website, it's like Hobo or Hiker, where you can't tell. But what I'm getting at is that I'm looking to get to a point in society where we have the benefits of modern technology, but yet we are able to live connected with the natural world in a way that humans were free before the rise of the state some 6,000 years ago. So I'd be looking, and I believe that the best way to get to that is by eliminating centers of power, like illegitimate centers of power, be they, political power, be they military power, or be they
corporations.
Economic power. Instead, what I would like to see is I would like to see the power distributed as evenly as possible between as many hands as possible. And if we can find a way to do that and there's a couple of different, technological advances that I think we're pretty much on the edge of, we can very closely find ourselves living near something that might be called a utopia. However, if we don't do that, and we're going to wind up destroying ourselves, either through warfare or through destruction of the natural environment, or by, simple hatred. Just keep in mind, imagine if we got to a point where robots could do all the work for everyone. You no longer needed to hire a single employee. Robots would handle it. If you lived in a society where everyone owned the robots, that would be a paradise. If you lived in a society where the capitalist class owned the paradise, that owned the robots, that would literally be a cyberpunk dystopia. So I think that we've gotten to a point where we need to move on from the specific economic system that we have. And what I've described, may sound very theoretical and utopian, and that's fine, because again, I think what's more important about it is that it be an ideal to strive for, as opposed to a roadmap of this is exactly what we must do and how we must do it. Does that make sense?
So would you concede that in a socialist society, economic growth would decrease, or at least the rate of it would decrease?
I think it would, and I think it should. I think that, at the moment, and not necessarily. So if you did a market socialist society, economic growth would probably continue to increase. Right. So because you would essentially be doing capitalism with a human face. But if you move beyond market socialism to something like market anarchism or to something like communism, the rate of the economy, the rate of economic growth would begin to level out, but also you don't need it to
that much, right?
Grow. Yeah. I'm reminded of, Cambodia, for instance, before the capitalist American-backed Pol Pot was put into power, and before the guy who was even worse than Pol, well, not even worse, but pretty damn bad, before that king was in power in Cambodia, you essentially had a country of peaceful Theravada Buddhists.
Right.
And Westerners came and introduced all these new technological crop things. So previously, the Theravada Buddhists had worked 6 months out of the year and rested 6 months out of the year. Then the Westerners came in and introduced technology that doubled their crop yields. So the Theravada Buddhists worked 3 months out of the year and rested 9 months out of the year. I think, and then eventually Westerners were like, no, we can't have that, and put in all of these incentives and introduced currency and new capitalist ideology. And before you knew it, mobs of people were tearing babies in half and stuff. It was horrifying. And that, again, that's before Pol Pot, before the Vietnamese communists stopped him.
Right.
So I think that ultimately this need to constantly grow our economy and to constantly get wealthier and wealthier is it's self-destructive. It almost makes me think of humans like yeast. If you're making beer, the yeast eventually eats all the stuff until it makes the beer itself toxic for itself, and then it dies off and humans drink it. And I hope that humans are not the yeast in some other higher being's brew.
Right. And I think that's interesting because it kind of makes sense why a lot of economists are against socialism, is because their goal is to see more economic growth and incentivize it. But I think if you have the take where we don't really necessarily, we need to maintain our economy. I can understand that. Where I am right now, and I am in a weird spot because I'm born a libertarian, but at the same time, I guess I'm a little worried about both sides, left and right, and I think there's a lot of pitfalls in both. And so
There are leftists are annoying as all get out. Like
no, I mean, I honestly, I feel like I sympathize with both left, right, or lib right and lib left. But I feel like humans need to have some form of disinterested government for stuff like, judicial and medical. But then that's when you're getting into like statism. And then that's when you're like, wait a second, but we can't really trust the state. And then you have to be like, well, is there a way to mitigate the corruption in the state? So I guess like where I fall economically is like right in the middle between left and right, because I'm totally okay with worker co-ops. Yeah, but I think they most people are. Like, yeah, I feel like they can be at least implemented voluntarily if people, or even, I mean, I'm even okay with like incentives being offered. I think that's fine, but I think the danger comes in, and I think Marx's perspective on this was that you would need a revolution, you would need a state to implement these co-ops, and then that state needs to be dissolved. But the issues we've had in so many cases is that state never actually gets dissolved, and it just continues in like a status situation.
Yeah. Well, I should clarify there. Marx predicted a worker revolution. He didn't say we should make it happen. He said it would happen whether like we did it or not. Marx's big thing was like the march of history. And he saw, and it's really interesting, like, because he essentially saw the development of capitalism out of feudalism to be a good thing. Because and I actually believe you couldn't go from feudalism to communism. So it was more of a society develops from feudalism to capitalism, from capitalism to socialism, and from socialism eventually to communism. Like, and the idea that like we need to cause a revolution to do this is more of like a Marx-Leninist thing. Like when Lenin came in and took Marx's writings and said, okay, let's take Marx's writings in philosophy and let's find a way to make this happen. And was very successful as far as overthrowing the Romanovs, which, I mean, screw the Romanovs. They got exactly what they deserved. But like, well, maybe not the kids, but but like, the state certainly did not wither away, and we saw some, horrifying human rights abuses from Russia and China. But also, I'm going to point out a lot of that is Russian and Chinese culture. Like you'll notice Russia is kind of creepy and authoritarian, like even though it's not communist anymore.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like it has all of the economic liberties that like a fascistic society has, but then it has like the authoritarian and communist aspect too, and it's just really wonky. I don't like it.
And it has a capitalist market, and the same thing like with China, and I praise China a bit because they have a lot fewer prisoners than we do. Good on you, China. Somehow we're worse than you at that.
Oh man, but it's still the amount of like state worship that happens there is insane.
Yeah, they're very authoritarian. These are aspects of their culture. But I would also say, like, if you want to look at a spot where, communism and socialism, really, it's not really communism, has functioned surprisingly enough, is take a look at Vietnam. I mean, they've done some, more capitalistic reforms, but overall, like, they absolutely obliterated the COVID crisis. And I think Luna Oy, who is... are you familiar? Yeah, American Johnson, the guy who I was debating with. Yeah,
his wife. There, right?
Yeah, he lives there, and his wife is a Vietnamese communist, and like the two of them blog about it all the time. And even before I knew them, I used to point to Vietnam as like a success story because, for the most part, you don't have the huge authoritarianism. You don't really have the purges. There was revolutionary violence on both sides during the war, obviously, but like. Vietnam has an anti-authoritarian character that that like Russia and China simply don't. And it's another reason why I think if Americans did communism, we do it really, really well, because as a nation, for the most part, we are very anti-authoritarian, or, well, at least 2/3 of us are. I'm looking at you freaking Trumpers. Yeah, but we do. There is definitely an anti-authoritarian character in American culture and American mythology. And I think that, socialism implemented in America, if we can get rid of our capitalist religion, I think it would be much closer to what I'd like to see out of libertarian socialism. Just we would have to defeat the fascists and, get rid of this society that, one of the big problems is that it's like this, we were founded in part by Calvinists, and capitalism grows out of like Calvinist Protestant work ethic and Calvinist ideas about predestination. And that when you remove God from the equation, but you keep the predestination, suddenly, the rich deserve to be rich. They earned their place. And the poor deserve to be poor, and they deserve to be punished, and they deserve to be treated like garbage, because they're the sinners who are going to hell, even though we don't believe in hell, but we're still going to treat them like garbage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, but I feel like a more smooth way to actually become more libertarian and to have like more of a socialist like society would be to just incentivize worker co-ops.
Sure, but how do you do that? You can either do it with
like tax incentives, maybe. I feel like
that would be nice. Yeah, well, I mean, and that would be like democratic socialism, right? So you would essentially have we like, let's say Biden hadn't been elected and we got Bernie, because Bernie, it's so funny that he styles himself as a democratic socialist, but his policies are actually soc-dem.
I like argue with so many people about this. I'm like, he doesn't want the music.
Yeah. But you know what? It was brilliant too, because they were just going to call him a socialist anyway, so you might as well own it.
No, true, honestly. And like, he knew that like people needed and wanted like radical change, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, a lot of people do. The youth definitely does, because we don't like. Am I still I don't know. I'm graying at the time. I was the youth one day. I don't know what the Zoomers want. They're strange.
True.
But like the youth of the country are in a position where we are worse off than our parents. We're in even with the best economy in American history, we are objectively in a worse problem. We've got more debt, we've got less property, and what makes it even worse is we're the most educated generation in American history. And therefore we're smart enough to know we're getting screwed. So like, you combine that with a really bad economy, obviously somebody like Bernie is going to be hugely popular with us, but sadly also, the political institutions and the political and social institutions are all kind of arrayed against us and against change happening. So, I mean, I would say that like, I am definitely not like a leftist adventurist. I don't think it would be a good idea to just run out and declare libertarian communism by war tomorrow, and I'm a Buddhist, which I'm not a pacifist, but I'm about as close to being a pacifist as you can without actually being a pacifist. Right. So I think it is ethically on us to do everything in our power to find a way to build a better world peacefully. And I think that, as far as like my views on Buddhism and karma in particular, I don't think you can actually kill your way to a better world. I think the karmic seed that you plant by getting your mindset into that and actually going through the kind of revolutionary violence that would need to happen for a revolution to succeed is part of like that sort of dooms the revolutionary project from the end. So I think that there needs to be a higher level of communication for people to move forward. That said, people don't like to give up what they've got. I mean, like the fear of loss is so incredibly like, I always point this out because everybody freaks out like when they lose some money in the stock market or whatever, even though money isn't real and it's a fiction. Like we create it to, yeah, Yeah,
fiat money. It's like it's like social construct the same way race is, right?
Yeah, race or gender, honestly. But yeah, they're very important things and very important concepts. But really, like money, it's a measure of wealth. We use it to incentivize human cooperation. And so, like, you know, it's like having inches. And the idea that like we can't do this because we don't have enough money is as dumb as saying, oh, we can't build this house, we don't have enough inches. But people get attached to it, you know, and they think it's real. And so people spend their life chasing after it and trying to get as much of it as they can. Sorry, I just started ranting about money. What the hell was I talking about?
I think we were talking about, like, I guess how it would look more in a pragmatic sense.
Right. So here's the thing. People, so money not being real. One of the things that they did a study in grocery stores, and they wanted to see how they could incentivize people to bring their own reusable bags instead of using the plastic bags. So first what they said is, well, what we're going to do is we're going to give everyone a 6-cent credit on their purchase. And so we will give you 6 cents if you bring your own bags. And nobody did it. Nobody cared enough about 6 cents to bring their own bags. So then what they did is they said, okay, we're going to institute a 6-cent tax, and we will charge you an extra 6 cents if you don't bring your own bags. And everybody brought their bags because the pain of losing 6 cents was like way worse than the joy that you would get from gaining 6 cents. And so as a result, like, you know, you can see how these economic crashes can happen where people freak out because they're losing money on the stock market and they begin to behave extremely defensively. Similarly, you know, you get a bunch of people saying to what's his face, Jeff Bezos, hey, you don't own Amazon anymore. We own Amazon. Deal with it. Like, Jeff Bezos is going to freak out and do everything he can to regain his control of Amazon. So historically speaking, that's kind of why revolutions happen. Like, once somebody gains power, they don't want to give it up and they fight tooth and nail to keep it. Now, that said, also the one universal constant is change. So there is going to come a time when that doesn't happen, you know? And
I guess I just don't know if a society would be able to function without money, expressly for the reason how I've always thought about money is that it's just quantified work. So instead of like, since you're a playwright, right? Maybe, let's say I make candles, and just to make it more like, let's say you're an electrician, right? So if you want one of the candles, I could be like, hey, without a world of money, I could be like, hey, can you come over and fix my light bulb, right? The light bulb that is supposed to last for 100 years. But instead of you doing like, but let's say I don't need a light bulb fixed, but I need my toilet plunged, right? You're not a plumber. You give me the money that I can use to have a plumber come over, right? So I feel like it's more of a bargaining tool.
Well, yeah, it's a medium of exchange.
Right.
But my point would be that oftentimes it's a medium of exchange that has a number of very large drawbacks. The first and foremost being that it is very easy to manipulate. You know, a good example might be fine art. So, you know, by the way, brace yourself. Fine art is a scam. Like, paintings, especially paintings that are worth like thousands, a lot of what usually happens with regard to that is like a wealthy family will find an artist that they like.
Demand.
Yeah, who paints paintings. They will create the demand by then investing in that artist's career a little bit and like introducing that artist to all of their wealthy friends.
This becomes a social status issue.
Exactly. And people pay ridiculous amounts for whatever this person paints. It has nothing to do with the work that artist actually did. It's with the perception of what it is valued at, which is why like money, there's just, it's a system. and it's working. It's a very old and buggy system that I think we can do better than. And that's actually why I mentioned swarm technology when I was talking with David Friedman. That I think we could do, and again, I'm not a programmer. Like, I don't know. What I understand about swarm technology is that it is a means of aggregating individual human input in such a way that the individual humans who put in their ideas about something or their desires or whatever become smarter than the sum of their parts. And it has been able to outperform both experts and markets in terms of like correct prognostications about the future. I think we could use that. If we used that technology, we could probably adapt it to serve as, okay, we need this much food sent here, and we need to build this many houses, and we need to, we need these people to produce our entertainment or whatever. I think that if you could do something like that, I really think that we might find a more efficient way where we wouldn't have the drawbacks that money creates and that the centralization of power causes. Now, I will also say to you, and I'm happy that you're kind of thinking beyond and also not getting too swept up in like leftist revolutionary stuff, because you don't want to do that. But what I think is important that people understand is that a variety of viewpoints, especially economic viewpoints, are very good. We need people out on the fringes of society so that we can communicate with the people who are more within society. Because if you're inside something, you can't get a good perspective on it. And so, like, in a lot of ways, we need kooks and artists and weirdos to give the kind of feedback that people who actually drive the social machine and are actually within the polis, the center of the polis of the human community, so that they can gain proper perspective. So I think it's centrism. I will say I have a lot of bad things to say about centrism for centrism's sake, but I would also say that I think it is oftentimes a sound policy, and you absolutely should be critical and skeptical towards any economic or political plan from anyone, and especially from, a rudderless hippie like me.
No, I mean, I definitely think you have some interesting ideas. I just feel like a lot of those ideas are kind of rooted in an expectation of a future, I guess, progress, which I feel like that could happen. And I feel like that's something that we could talk about at that point. I just think that where we are as a society right now, I feel like the best thing we could do, and again, in my opinion, is to become a little bit more of a social democracy. And that's not even to say to like continue putting funds into the social programs we have now, because a lot of them have like failed, to like more smartly like divide the money and like, I guess, make it go more toward like education and things that have more of a proactive.
Well, I may surprise you, but I'm going to agree with you, actually. I'm a big believer in, shoot for the moon, land in the stars. One of the reasons why I purposefully go out and have a more out there way of looking at economics and society is because I want to expand people's minds. I want to get them to realize that there's a lot more than the little box that we've all been presented with. And so I would say on a longer time frame, I think the first step is to defeat fascism.
Right.
Like,
I don't know if it ever can be.
Get rid of Trump, get those people out of power, because they're going to kill us all if we don't. Then after we defeat fascism, I think social democracy is a great stepping stone, leading eventually into democratic socialism. And I would like to see that democratic socialism lead eventually into, libertarian communism.
I do feel like it's a little interesting, though, that I feel like the democratic socialism would only necessarily work if those future things came to be, because I feel like we see a lot of progressive countries that are either like stuck at like social democracy and headed a little bit more toward capitalism, or just kind of staying and hovering around social democracy. I don't really see any of them regressing to.
Yeah. Well, you'll notice something, and that's that they are directly incentivized to do that because they have to deal with every other country out there. And there are a lot of very wealthy people with a lot of power and influence that want to open up new markets and want to make as much profit as possible. And, you know, a country that is more socialistic is a country that is more closed to the capitalist means of doing business. And if you're closed to the capitalist means of doing business, you know, the capitalist will find a way to open you up. It's almost like that. What was that meme that was going around for a while where it was like the eagle, and it was like oil discovered on Mars. And then like you see the oil, like, it sounds like Mars needs some freedom.
That's funny. Yeah. And I also understand that if you're competing in an international market, there's a drive to actually like have incredible economic growth, right? So I get that. And I guess
I'm sorry. I was just going to say that you do your thing, then I'll tell you what I was going to say.
I guess if you are coming at it from the objective not being economic growth and the objective kind of just maintaining the growth that you have, I understand how. My concern though is that it would actually be like more backwards growth than a maintenance. But I do think that there could be technological advances in the future that would actually either cause a maintenance or a growth.
Yeah, well, I think you're totally right on that. So what I wanted to get to read was, this is from Layman. It's a super chat, $5. Thank you, Layman. Some social democratic countries have almost eliminated homelessness despite having more billionaires and total wealth among them. I mean, that may be. China has the most billionaires in the world, I think, or something like that, or something close to it. I hate billionaires. Not even Jesus deserves to be a billionaire. But, you can probably find a way to eliminate homelessness with enough aggressive government programs and charity.
That's the thing, though. The only reason I dislike billionaires isn't necessarily like a personal reason. I think it's just because it's representative of an unfair society that we have. So I feel like if we did have a situation where there was negligible homelessness, everyone's wealth was going up incrementally according to the GDP, which would like suggest that it was being fairly distributed. And then you also had multiple billionaires or even many billionaires. I really wouldn't, care that much.
Yeah, I wouldn't have as big of an issue with wealth either if people didn't suffer because of a wealth disparity. I wouldn't have as big of an issue with that. However, I will point something out, and that's that rich and poor are mutually dependent states. And for someone to be rich, you require a number of people must be poor. Because imagine, like, if I waved a magic wand and everyone on Earth was a billionaire. Everyone on Earth, how much money do you think you'd have to pay Bill Gates to come by and like debug your computer? Or like Michael Bloomberg, how much you got to pay Michael Bloomberg to go and like be a waiter at your next high society function? Right. The fact is that if everyone was a billionaire, it would essentially mean no one was. They for all of that power that they have, they depend on other people having less and needing the money that they have more, so that they'll jump and fall over each other to bow and scrape and do all that. I despise billionaires just because, and I don't hate them individually. Like, I despise the class because one of what it symbolizes, as you pointed out, but also I think it hurts people. I think it actively hurts both the billionaires themselves and also all of the people who have to reap the fallout of what they have. Because I really can't imagine being a billionaire, having that kind of money, being that isolated from society. Like, you couldn't have a real friendship in that situation, you know? Right. It's like you're so above people, you're no longer a part of the human race.
There is actually an interesting article that came out where there was a multimillionaire in, I think she was in on the ground of like Apple, and she was kind of expressing that where like her friendships weren't as nearly as genuine. And I think that's interesting, but I think a lot of times people underestimate how, and I also understand you can say that this would be like reflected in the capitalistic system, but how a lot of billionaires are like the framework of the economy, because they don't have their $1 billion just sitting in their mattress. It's invested in like their own company. It's intertwined so deeply into the economy's fibers, you know?
I agree. I just think that's a bad idea then to have one person control that much of the economy.
I agree with you. I 100%. I like to think of it as like a game almost, where here's a rigged game. You have these like, you have people who almost like win the game with no effort, and then other people who have to really, really, really work for it. It's not necessarily the people who win the game's fault. And they could even be helping the people who are like slugging along. But it's not, again, it's more of the game's rules rather than any of the individuals.
Well, I would say if our billionaire class decided, you know, as a class, that billionaires are bad and we need to, you know, bring humanity to the next level, and voluntarily gave up their status to end poverty and hunger and all that, they would be the greatest heroes in human history. Like, people would be saying their names for centuries, if not millennia, if they actually did that. You know, and I really want, like, if Jeff Bezos, if you're listening right now, you know, seriously, like, that's a kind of immortality that almost no one could attain. And it's definitely not and I think it would be a much healthier immortality than the immortality that Elon Musk is trying to currently attain by like putting his head in a computer system or something. Like, I really think that, you know, that kind of legacy would be something that like would be, it'd be the stuff of legends. Now, will it happen? I don't know, because usually they're idiots. But also, you know, the privilege. There's another quote by Bakunin where he said it is the characteristic of privilege to kill the mind and heart of men. That every privileged person is in a way like debased by it, because, and this is something that speaks very much to me as a Buddhist, because as a Buddhist, we believe that good karma is as negative as bad karma. It still turns the wheel. It still gets you stuck to things. And the best way that I might explain it is, think of like a cat that is well fed, but doesn't have any little things to chase. A life without strife and struggle, where everything is easy for you, is as destructive to happiness as a life where you can't get what you need. In a lot of ways, it's different. The poison that you're drowning in is pleasure and not pain, but ultimately it's still self-destructive. Right. So again, that's another reason why I think we should try our best to move beyond the rich. I'm okay with having a little bit of inequality. I think that's inevitable and might as well be fine. The issue is when the inequality gets to such a level that like we've got people as virtual kings and dictators, and usually when that happens, other people get hurt.
So I guess is your position then that it's healthy for people to have the type of private property where they can like strive to like achieve that whatever private property it is, but they should have the fundamental I guess like necessities provided to them?
I mean, I think everyone should have the basics provided to them regardless. Like that's number one goal. I would like to see a floor on society where everybody has enough to eat, everybody has a roof over their head, everybody has enough to drink, that kind of thing. Beyond that, I'm okay with providing luxuries to people's individual tastes. The one luxury that I would not want to provide to anyone would be supreme power or a great deal of power. I think that private property as an institution, I kind of want to eliminate currency and private property because they create the incentive for someone to become a billionaire or a politician.
But I think you made a really interesting point that I agree with, that a life without striving isn't as as fulfilling. So I guess my question would be, would that be a less fulfilling life if you wouldn't be striving for like the necessities, or at least to some extent?
Perhaps, but I think there's other things that we can strive for. Like if you get Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, the basic stuff is the bottom of the pyramid. And as somebody climbs up the pyramid, they don't stop striving. They don't just stop at like level 2. They keep going and going until they reach like self-actualization. So I feel like there is strife and struggle that can happen in a society where the basic minimum is everyone's needs are provided at the basic minimum, and also where the absolute heights of power, where nobody can work and get lucky enough to become king. You know,
and I agree with that. I would totally agree with that. But again, I don't know. I just feel like social democracy could also, I guess.
I mean, it might as an initial step. I don't have a problem with that there. I just think that we can't stop at social democracy because if we do, things will stagnate and the capitalists will pull us back into this. Yeah. So I think that's part of it. Yeah. I mean,
another thing, I'm sorry.
No. Please. I talk too much.
No, you're good. I guess my question would be, why would you think that social democracy would stagnate and eventually like segue into a more like fascistic state? Then you would think socialism would segue back into social democracy, because we've seen that happen like multiple times.
So you're talking about why would we continue to move on as opposed to, you know, moving backwards? I think because for the same reason that like capitalism has not fallen back into feudalism.
But we've seen socialism fall back into democratic democracy.
Yeah, sure. But that's also a product of the time in history that we are at right now. Like if you went back in time to the feudal age when the capitalist class was just starting to emerge, you'd see failed peasant revolts. You'd see people experimenting in ways to live outside of the king's power and then collapsing, and people saying, oh, well, this is just it. This is the end of history. Gotcha. We've got the perfect system with our, feudal lords and, our plowshares.
And I guess that also goes back to how much innovation will we have at that point?
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. We're living in a revolutionary time where technology is exploding at a rate that the human mind can't even possibly, process all of it. And it's only accelerating and only getting faster. Part of that, I think, also is just a product of aging. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've noticed as I get older, time seems to speed up. Like my experience of it. Like, I don't know if you remember this. When you were a kid, did you used to think like summer lasted for a year?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did too. And when I thought it lasted for a year, it genuinely, the experience of it felt like a year. And then I remember like in early elementary school, I looked it up and I was like, oh, it's only 3 months. And the summer like went by like that. And I was just like,
Right.
Yeah, so I think our perception of time as we get older, things really seem to just gallop ahead. So yeah, I mean, this has been fascinating, by the way. I think we're coming up on 2 hours almost. I don't want to keep you from Hunter or anything. What have you been working on lately, by the way?
So we are writing a Breonna Taylor video, so that'll be interesting. So
Thank you for doing that, by the way.
Oh, sure. I've been like researching all the different angles on it, because I feel like there's a lot of articles that come at it from their own like specific perspective, and I'm trying to conglomerate all of everything into like one video.
You should make sure to check out, if you haven't already. There is a theory that I've heard. I don't know how much evidence there is for it, but I know Breonna Taylor's like her family's lawyer or whatever mentioned it, that there may have been some collaboration between the police and a real estate developer that wanted to demolish her building and build like new luxury condos. Yeah,
there was gentrification, like, and there was also, it's so sketchy because they had their body cams like on them, but they didn't have them turned on.
Yeah, because they're cops and they just do that. And I hate cops. It's funny too, because like one of my best friends is a cop.
Oh no.
Yeah. Well, no, he's on my side. But yeah, really? I don't know if you ever heard of him. Yeah, Captain Ray Lewis. He's a former Philadelphia police captain who joined Occupy Wall Street.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, there's you can look him up. There's a bunch of videos of him like on MSNBC and CNN and stuff when he did it. People were really amazed. They arrested him like in his full cop uniform. And he and I have talked about like a lot of the problems with the police, and he's given me some really interesting insights to it. But yeah, I mean, with regard to Breonna Taylor, there's something very sketchy there, and also something that feels very true in the sense it almost reminds me of like those like pulp detective stories set in like the 1920s and stuff. And also you'll notice, like what I said in the debate with T-Jump last night, she was killed as a direct result of the war on drugs.
Like, oh yeah, I know. Yeah. I'm actually going to go on a guy's podcast, and I'm going to talk to him about the disinformation campaign and canceling campaign that a lot of conservatives and conservative influencers have launched on Black victims.
Because
horrible. I know, it's terrible. It's like the only cancel culture they approve of is against dead Black victims. And it's like, are you serious? It's like you're not going to like cancel like Trump for 20 years of tax fraud, like millions of dollars, but then you're going to cancel like an innocent woman.
Yeah. Well, it's they're invested in hierarchy. They're invested in anybody at the top of the, and again, it's predestination, you know, like Trump is rich, Trump is the president, therefore he should be, therefore everything's fine. Don't change anything. I can't stand it when people are moving around. Everybody stay in your countries. Nobody move. You're freaking me out. Like
Caitlin, then it's like Trump is king, and it's
But you know, we've had those memes for years. The God Emperor meme, that was a joke, you idiots.
I know.
The God Emperor also in like, he's a bad guy. But they're just like unironically like fucking fascists.
And they call themselves libertarians. It's like, you complete idiot.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of people within the libertarian movement that are there because there are a lot of, so Barry Goldwater advanced a line very similar to Trump, and he used a number of libertarian arguments as a disingenuous means of continuing segregation, because the segregationists had been defeated. They said, okay, let's have informal segregation. I don't want Black people in my business. I don't want them in my pool. I don't want them, you know, my drinking fountains, none of that. And so what they tried to do was say, oh, get the government out of my business. And so a bunch of people signed on to the right libertarian movement. And, you know, in a way, the right libertarian movement was from its beginning a psyop. Like, it wouldn't exist without Charles Koch funding Richard Fink. Like, it would not exist without oil billionaires funding people like Murray Rothbard, who then went on to, you know, be one of the major people like David Friedman. I don't know if David Friedman was funded by oil billionaires or not, because he seems to be a decent guy. So I would assume they went, he's got a little too much integrity for us. Let's fund that guy. But there's still some genuinely principled right libertarians who aren't racists and aren't fascists, but they're like that's maybe half of them, and then the others are just monsters like Christopher Cantwell.
I feel like a lot of them just jump on the idea of like freedom and liberty just because it's like optically good, but then they're actually like status.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I mean, a good example would be J.F. Garpe, the neo-Nazi who calls himself a libertarian that I debated a while ago. Like he'll say stuff like, "Oh, we need strong borders so that we can have freedom of association," and I'm like,
"Wait, you're a classical liberal, right?"
yeah. He says he's fash. Like, I mean, he's friends with Richard Spencer and funded, and funded by Jeffrey Epstein. Like Jeffrey Epstein gave him $20,000.
Are you kidding me?
Totally 100% serious. There's actually a stream you can find if you Google like JF Garpe, a man beyond parody, and like there's a stream that he's doing with Richard Spencer where he tells Richard Spencer he's like funded by Jeffrey Epstein. Richard Spencer's like, "You're joking, right?" And he's like, no, I'm not. And you just see Richard Spencer for the one time in his life, it looks like he wants to crawl out of his skin and disappear.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So anyway, this has been really cool. We're coming up on the end here. So do you want to plug your pluggables?
I'm honestly fine. I mean, I have Instagram, my name, Carissa Avallone. I have Twitter, same thing, Carissa Avallone.
And is Avallone not Avallone?
Yeah, Avallone, yeah.
Oh, the Arthurian nerd in me is so disappointed.
I actually knew Hunter growing up, and I had a bike that had Avallone on it, and I had like the biggest crush on Hunter. I was like 12, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, it has like almost Avallone on it."
We're destined to get married, and then you did.
I know. Fairy tales actually work out.
Yeah, that's really cute. Honestly, you don't hear enough of that. With me, my wife met me. I was I was working at a place called Shadowbox Cabaret, where it was a dinner theater where we did rock and roll and sketch comedy, and I did very well there with the ladies because I was a big dude. Like I still am. I'm like 6'2", but I was in much better shape at the time because I was like 20, and I was a goth with my like fishnet shirt and stuff. And I would go up to like bust the table, and like women who were out there for like their bachelorette party or whatever, a lot of them would start feeling the rock and roll vibe, decide they want to take one of us home, usually me. And so occasionally what I do is like, if I saw a girl in the audience that I thought was cute, I'd go up and like try to bust her table so I could flirt with her while I did it. And I saw my wife and I was like, "Oh man, she's cute." And I went up and tried to bust her table, and she was like drinking like her water. I was like, "Hey, can I take that?" And she's like, "No." And I'm just like, "I think I like this one." And then, like, I kept coming back. Not really to take the water, but just to flirt with her. But she's like, "No, I'm still drinking this."
I will not take this water.
Yeah,
I will finish the ice in it.
Yeah. And 2 years later, we moved to New York, and like 10 years later, we were married, and now we have a 2-year-old.
Oh, that's wonderful. You guys, it's so funny because it's like that's like a 12-year span for you guys, and then like our Hunter and I, we've only been in a relationship for like 2 years.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, you knew more than that.
Yeah, that's true.
Most people, I mean, we were living together for 8 years before we got married. So,
wow,
yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. Like part of the reason I didn't want to marry her at the time was I didn't have any money, and like we put a lot of big major life things were put on hold because the economy was in the garbage, and it was extra in the garbage for us because we lived in Harlem.
Yeah, we would have taken things slower, but then other intentions were had when it came to babies.
Absolutely. We had from Dick Beard the Merciless, "Ooh, babies, gross. Babies are amazing."
It's true.
So why tell ideological writers where their funding actually comes from? sorry, I'm reading this from Herb Bryant. I don't know exactly what you're getting at there, Herb. I usually ideological writers know where their money comes from. It's other people that don't know where it's from. But
I just think he's saying that it's interesting that he admitted it to, I guess, Rick Spencer, like that he's getting funded by Epstein.
That's an aspect of JF. He's an oversharer on an. I don't think he has really a full concept of like what is appropriate to talk about and what's because he's a Nazi. So.
Right. It's not rational at all. So
yeah. Okay. So at Brenton, sorry, I'm going through some chats here, and let me see what at Brenton Lengel. Do you have any links to know more about Swarm and other tech that could replace the market? So what I'm going to recommend you look up is it's called Improving Humanity by the Power of Bees. It used to be a Cracked podcast. This is where I first heard about it. Humanity, Power of Bees. I think it's still online, though a lot of people have taken it down. Here it is on Earwolf, and I'm going to put it into the chat, and everybody can check it out. So what I have coming up, by the way, for those of you who don't know, my comic Snow White Zombie Apocalypse issues of it have been sent to me, which I'm excited about. They're coming to me in the mail. We'll be signing them, sending them out to the Kickstarter backers. So everybody should get something, assuming Trump hasn't totally destroyed the mail, should hopefully get something in the next few weeks. And we will also be running a Kickstarter for Snow White Zombie number 3. And you'll be able to get first through the 3rd issue as well through that. I'm really excited. Things are moving along. And I just found out that a really high-profile actress just asked my company for a copy of Snow White Zombie.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you able to disclose who it is? If not, that's fine.
I'm not able to disclose because I don't know that it's the thing, so I won't say a name. But if you guys can look, hang on. The company that I publish with is Scout Comics, and I just shared this on my Facebook because we just signed with a major film production and distribution company.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I'll put that into the thing. This is from deadline.com. So yeah, if you guys want to invest in the Swaza series early, please do, because I actually already have a 1-hour pilot written for the series. And the comic is coming along. People really like it. So definitely check that out and keep an eye on what we're doing. Yeah. And obviously check out and subscribe to Carissa's channel. You've been building your YouTube channel, which I think you've only had it for a couple months and it's growing fast. I would expect.
I haven't honestly been posting that much because I've been either going on other people's channels or modding debates every evening, and there's only so much time in the day, especially with 2 babies.
Oh yeah. So. I totally know what you're talking about. I don't have 2. I've got the 1. And oh my God, by the way, okay, I'm sorry, just parent moment with you. So my son, he got a hold of my wife took him and was showing him on Amazon the different because she wanted to get him a raincoat and galoshes and let him pick it out. And so of course he picked out a big yellow raincoat with an excavator on it, which is his favorite.
Aww.
And he went and picked out a set of rainbow rain boots that light up when you walk around with them. And he's just I want the rainbows, nothing. So we get them for him. And they came yesterday. And when we opened that box, he screamed. He was so incredibly happy. And he hasn't taken either of them off since.
So cute. And I know he likes packages. I think he said that last time. So that's awesomeness.
Anytime a package comes, it's it's Christmas for him, even if it's just something coming from me. It's a package.
Oh, does your son, do you allow him to watch TV to an extent? Or?
Yeah. We don't have TV, so we'll have him watch YouTube or, Sesame Street. He loves this one YouTube guy called Blippi. He's crazy about it. I was
literally going to suggest it. That's why I asked you.
Yeah.
My daughter, that's the first word she said.
It was Blippi. Yeah, I can see why. He's really. It's interesting too because he's got kind of a checkered past.
Apparently there was a butt issue.
There's a strong butt issue. Yeah, he was trying to be like an edgelord sketch comedian for a while, and then eventually got lucked into found his niche with the Blippi thing, and in a sense like scoured the other Blippi stuff from the internet. But yeah, no, yeah. My son 100% loves Blippi and will have my wife pretend to be Blippi so that he can have a conversation with Blippi.
My daughter will literally get mad. She will scream if we turn Blippi off. And I'm like, why are you like this? Oh, that's funny. Well, yeah. I'm glad he is going to appreciate Blippi.
Yeah, I'm totally glad. I'm glad that I'm sorry if I headed you off at the pass there, but yeah, no, he loves it. I'm glad that you were gonna. He loves Blippi. He loves Bob Ross.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and we'll ask to see Bob Ross. And Bob Ross is on Netflix, of course, so it's easy to get. I really want to get him into Adventure Time when he gets a little older. And lately, we have a hilarious video of him sitting there. We were sitting down to watch the final Star Wars movie, the Rise of Skywalker, and he was like, "No Star Wars, want panda bears." We're like, "But this has lightsabers." No, want panda bears.
I feel like they would get along really well, your little boy and Rose. I feel like they should meet sometime. It would be cool. Maybe the next time you're hiking the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. I think we should do the Appalachian Trail and the PCT and the CDT. And that would be fun. Like maybe we'll stop in on you if we're doing it.
That would be awesome, definitely. And they can have a little Blippi marathon.
That sounds like a blast. Social interaction after COVID. I can't wait.
I know, really. Oh man. Well, I honestly am gonna have to head out, but thank you again for having me on. It was a great conversation.
Please do. It was great to have you here. I need to answer a couple questions, so you can run off. I'll answer the questions from the chat. And thank you so much for coming on. We would love to have you on again. You guys are wonderful. And tell your husband Hunter I said hi.
I will, and give your family my best.
Absolutely. All right. So those of you who are still here, yes, Adventure Time is incredible. Somebody had a question about the comics. So I do have some comics that are for sale on eBay, but I don't know who put them up. They may be for more than you would otherwise pay. You can get an issue of Snow White Zombie #1 through Scout Comics. You can order that. Or you can get it by backing one of my Kickstarters if you happen to be there when I'm backing it. You don't do payment clients and stuff. You can also order it specially at your comic shop. So you can go to your comic shop, say, I want Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, and they will order it from Scout for you. If you can get around it there. And, then you're supporting your local comic shop, and you'd actually get it for less if you got it through them than if you went through Scout. As far as, let's see, Adventure Time, Jake the dog is my Discord. Yeah. There will be no after COVID. I'm hopeful on that. And the pandemic could last until 2021. It's weird too, because like COVID for me, coincided with me stepping out and like going art full time. So like COVID's been very good for my creativity, but also like, oh my God, I miss humans. I miss people. I don't miss my job. I hope that never comes back, but I miss humans. So yeah. Anyway, it's been terrific talking to everybody. I'm glad that you all enjoyed having Carissa on. If you enjoyed this talk, please, like, comment, and subscribe. The channel's growing quickly, and you guys are like the part of the reason I'm not going stir crazy at the moment. So thank you all. This is Brenton of Insurrection with Brenton Lengel signing off.